Yeah, I think you can see now my Finder and now full screen the sketches. So this is, there should be a date somewhere. So 14437 was my student number at school. They started from 1 to whatever. And this was number 2. So probably this was in between submission document. The idea was to have, it was called the City of the Theater. So this is rotated. So on the top, we have west, on the right is north. This is the largest park in the central Madrid, which used to be a Royal Palace garden, now this public garden. So there you have, I think I can annotate, yes. You see in blue some sketching which is going around, is the thinking. Inking is what I chose to present. Some existing important buildings. It is the Astronomical Observatory, neoclassic building. This is a East Gate, Madrid Tondemón. So the street going to the east, actually not like this. It was a bit more, let me correct this. So it's a bit more like this. And then I just try to put a network of buildings, like a note in between. There were like several pavilions with different theatrical ideas, a library with a garden in front of the pond. This is existing pond. Actually, in this pond, the kings would have the representation of naval battles. So you could have a small size ships there. And this was the south end, where I did put some kind of cultural center, a big wall with all the offices, maintenance and stuff, and of course, open air theater. Okay, well, this was one of the initial sketches. But see in this time how, of course, this is overlaid, this is a transparency over the real site plan, which I don't have here. But it's already like outlining with ink some results from many sketches which underlie in the background. Let's go faster because there's 97 sketches here. Let me see if I can go to the next. Okay, so this is myself processing that. And see, now this is not presentation. This is a thinking sketch. The references stay, Liz Gate with this library, the lake, and trying to interact. Another existing entrance with one note, which is in the beginning. From the lake to that in the cultural center, I did a channel of water, and the museum elements were like small pavilions scattered around. See the way of drawing? This can be probably A3, A2 size, and this is like a fountain pen, like thinking. You see an intention, but it's not really design. This would correspond to Studio 5, right? So it's like a 1 year after you. In my case, Studio 5 was a 5th year, because I started the studio in 3rd year. First and second year, we had drawing, technical drawing, architectural analysis, and geometry, and so on. So they're just thinking, this is final drawing, okay? This is the wall from the back. You see the scale, the name. See the care you must have when you do hand drafting, right? So there is plenty of air. This was a planetarium because I thought the representation of the universe was part of that theatrical culture. And that cultural center was kind of a half-buried element. And you have the numbers scale, the numbers telling what is what, and of course my name and the professor and so on. So you can have a lot of information, but not being too overwhelming. Well, this was heavily criticized. They said it was kind of a Ajuma design for the church, something like that. Nothing against Ajumas, but it was the critic. This is for a different project, actually. This is totally rotated. In this case, this is north. This is now important road in Madrid, existing Prado Museum. This is the church with the cloister where we saw Rafael Moneo's extension. This is one of the axes I was using for the City of the Theater on the back. This is the station, right? So this was Opera Theater, which was another exercise of the course, which was already finished. And I was thinking about one extension for Prado Museum. This is existing botanical garden with a neoclassical building, which is integrated. So what I was checking here was to make the existing building just like 2 cubes with the temple in the center and connection corridor. I was doing like a landscape, a larger version of this building as an urban set of spaces, connection squares to the streets, open air theater, a newer theater for in the botanical garden, and small extensions in that style of Miralles, or maybe not as aggressive as Libeskind, because the brief was to make the Prado Museum as a school for dramatic arts, right? So I added a new program around, new theater with open air theater, and at the end, actually, is just outlined a new building, totally new building, which was the School of Dance. So I thought. So the program was very detailed. Also, we have to find out about it. Pali Pali. Okay, this is a different version. You see, this is changing the technique. Here you can see already the library, that channel with pavilions was already designed. Same with the opera. In this case, I'm showing the opera inside the space and changing the position of the building. And this is still thinking drawing, but the shade, instead of the line drawing, makes you have a feeling of mass, right? It's, originally it's 1 to 500 scale. They're like an A2 size drawing. So this thinking drawings. And I am mixing several projects. This is a presentation drawing of the library of the City of the Theater. This is all elevations. You have to make all elevations because it was very inspired by what was trendy in the early 80s. Arata Isozaki of that time, or Richard Maya. The library was very straightforward. This bottom elevation is one side. So it was a big box with all the reading programs, with a wall just intersecting. We had all the bookshelves. So it was like a very protected and very enclosed. And I thought that having this linear scheme really helped to move along the bookshelves, right? Instead of have too many repetitions. And that will be the facade against the lake. Right, so you have like a both division and connection. And there was a small triangular pavilion for the access and a small pond with a children library. So it was kind of the construction plan, a small Malevich. At that time, we discovered Zaha Hadid, and we started to experiment with the possibility of working with simple shapes. But this presentation, this was, I think, 1 to 200. And well, the hand drafting, I will expand a little bit. So you can see it is not very detailed, but it's already showing the reality of the construction of the windows with the frame and the structure supporting the building over the water, but without detailing too much for the scale, because this is so much you can do at that scale. This is the initial diagram for the library. And this was back on time before Zaha Hadid, right? It was like very neoclassical. I was doing at that time Alba in one of my professor's office, whose name was Alba also. And the project I was doing was kind of neoclassic. So this was more or less experimenting with the image of the project I was doing at the office. And the scheme was very classical. That book storage wall building was the same, facing the lake. Then central space with wings, right, with different functions, and a small courtyard for the children library, and then upper floor and section. This is 1 to 1000 scale. So this is probably A4 drawing. This is all you can detail at 1 to 1000. So reality, you can even go to the desks, but they are more or no more than just a few points, right? Central part, I'm reading a lecture hall and the central building space. And obviously this was all children library, playing space, of course, toilets around, and plenty of exterior courtyards. Very close to the entrance. So you have an entrance. So I shouldn't drink coffee and talk at the same time, but it's getting cold. Making the building neoclassic, I didn't remember this, but you will see the access of Laurentiana and the reading space of Laurentiana in the proportions. So this is dedicated to Uri Donhui. So you can work with it. So you have an access, control, and then you go to lecture, children, or main library. So this is thinking on program, on the space, but also how buildings work. And of course, the books very separated with a further filter to protect them from vandalism or from fire, from thieves, or so on. Again, changing the drawing technique helps you to see things in a different light. This is where the idea changed, right? And it is the same idea, but now one simple volume, one access the bookshelves. Actually, in this case, the building is getting almost totally into the water, and a play area for the children library. And it comes from this starting, very classical, but then simplifying and playing with this kind of pictorial or sculptural idea next to that quite defined, quite studied program. I didn't explain the detail because I don't have the notes here. So I would have my notes with all the calculations of areas and all that. But you can see that the program is very defined. It's not very generic. Well, it's just thinking on how things work from the most simple to the detail. So this really thinking drawing. Well, this is the detail of those elevations when they were finished. Back to the School of Dramatic Arts, again, concept drawing in which I'm experimenting with this kind of both pictorial, sculptural, architectural elements. And you see, this is in between presentation. So even one elevation, which is little more than just setting the mass, but you can see in the background the existing neoclassical buildings, Gothic church. So this is surely 1000 scale. Well, this is the detail of that sketch. Clearly, Zaha had it fun and experimenting with those things. One thing which I will encourage you, or I keep encouraging you, is not thinking only on the building, but this is all landscape elements, streets, ponds, and urban furniture, still not defined, but elements which really have something in between the building and the city itself. And the buildings may be more or less strong, and that idea little by little gets dissolved, diffuminated into the fabric of the city. Well, this is the sketch, that elevation. That's the color version of the drawing we said before. So you see here the classical garden, the library with that pond, that channel with all those pavilions. Here, if I remember well, is the Shades, or here, Shades Theater. And still finding out how to work in this area, Prado and that extension, which I was very ambitious. So even though the Prado was so small, and extensions are actually a small fraction of the Prado, I wanted to do a lot of things in the whole city because the scale was so huge. So too much was not enough. What detail of that drawing? Again, some drawings are very fast. This, you already had many sketches. You try to test how it works. So you spend a bit more time defining a bit more. Let's say close up. You can recognize, if you see at bits, this is from Louis Kahn Tower in Philadelphia. Right? This is the Opera Theater floor plan, actually the inside. But this is working in Le Corbusier's paintings, whereas this is Malevich. And in between it is just myself, mixed. So what I say, looking at references and keep drawing, analyzing buildings, if you don't copy directly, things are already in your mind, the same as you have words in your vocabulary. And they help you to start assembling those ideas, giving them a shape. So this is original elevation of Prado Museum. This is already presentation drawing. The building was huge, so I did in many small bits. This was presented at 200 scale. The photos I will cut, but you have all the text under. So the extensions are like overlapping the building on the back. I had a new glass tower elevator and new platforms. This is landscape, which will connect with the large scale of the garden, the Opera Theater on the back, and so on. So this was the next part. This is a new theater. I remember I was working all night before the submission, and this is the last thing I did. It's like a big sign for the representation. And this is actually the site plan I prepared for school. The size of the submission was limited, so it was 1 to 4,000. You have the building, those extensions on the back, and the theater, I said before, the School of Performing Arts, Opera Theater, a new axis, the Prado extension current, any access to the botanical garden, the observatory, and then the back the library and the pond and all that. Well, this is the expanded scale. Opera was just a box, which was like the framing of that three-dimensional Le Corbusier's painting with a roof garden on top. At that time, computers had not any graphic power. Actually, nobody used computers for drawing. So you have to make just copies, Xerox, and use transparencies. And this is like a real copy and paste, right? Pasting over the original old drawings. This is an in-between drawing for the library project, already working to scale. You can see very clear. Don't eat, don't sleep. This is literally Lawrenciana library. Plan, section, everywhere to see how could I fit it. So I cannot blame you for using Michelangelo. And other sketches. So you see results and process a little bit messy, but actually when you're processing, you are thinking on everything. Like the main layout, the bird eye view, the construction system, social system of that planetarium, the sections of that planetarium, alternative structural possibilities for that high rise, that planetarium tower, and so on. So you change often the scale, the point of view, the mood, and at times when you're very overwhelmed, it's like a small thumbnail with a huge project just in a few lines. So in the same sketch, you're thinking from detail to just the huge urban conception. So this is how the mind works. Of course, then you have to organize your thoughts. See, this is small volume of the opera theater, small box sinking in the park. Well, this is a close-up view. So you can see the opera, original Prado, and then the extension buildings. So this is the details of those drawings. And then a bit more elaborate, just regarding the city of the culture, right? This is actually not presentation drawings, but this is one of those moments in which you need to slow down and think what you're doing, right? So I could say one pavilion is one Baroque theater, in which both garden and theater have a perspective effects. This is classical theater based on Shakespeare, but it has also a cube, which is experimental modern theater. Shade theater was somewhere around here, not share, shade. Perfect. And other kind of theater, I don't remember anymore. Or whatever. It was like experimenting. So you go from very blurry and very generic to then slowing down and having these more detailed drawing just to test how things work. What you cannot do is to stay anchored always on one state. So this is part of this drawing. Obviously the library initial or intermediate, and some of those theaters, pavilions around the end of the channel. Another version, right, in which we have a bit more definition, and experimenting with elements which in the end didn't go through the project, right? So those things got simplified. Some experiment with the shade of the theater of that planetarium over there. Another version. Okay, this is in between. So it's one of the first trials to work. This is more Kandinsky than Malevich. Some in between version. So there it's already testing how the library would work. You see very clear postmodern still elements in children library and some parts. But see also the strategies of integrating the water, the piers for the boats, because you can go by boat in the lake. The strategy is to design the masses of green and the open spaces and so on, and try to include that in the drawing. Of course, this is already one version in which the building is more or less organized, but since at that time we didn't have much opportunity to make models, we had to work a bit more in drawings. So this is the slowing down and testing one possible result of the project. Imagining the interior space. So a lot of natural top lights, passerelles, and at the end, that wall, which would be the book storage. Children library, like having a passerelle in the water, right? A small pyramid. At that time, maybe I thought all children should know how to swim. Otherwise, this would be a very dangerous library. And well, trying to find how to design all those elements in context in the landscape. Actually, this was taken again from Kurokawa. Right. He had some nice amusement park somewhere, and the scale and the mood was very much in purpose. So I was just processing those buildings a little bit for my benefit. Well, elevations and plans, and this is already working on a scale to give the solution. Already things are decided, and this is the process of going in from the idea to the discipline of the dimensions and the scale. Right, so you see a lot of notes, actually what is remaining to do. So by Friday, I have to finish all the sections. Saturday afternoon, I have to do whatever, right? It's like the list already having the deadline. And see, now the section is not that has some understanding of the thicknesses and the size of the construction. There is a clear idea of what goes everywhere. So you have 2 floors or reading space, a hanging roof with deep top lights, and some side galleries with spaces to take a rest looking at the water, or just for communication around the building without disturbing the interior space or the central space. And this is the almost presentation drawing. So you check, look always the calculation of heights and dimensions. So this could be almost final. And then this is like checking how to draw, for example, the texture without spending too much time. Yeah. Working by hand is so fun and so laborious. But then the drawing is also telling the story of the building, not the story, but the mood on how buildings are used, right? And see that the freedom of working by hand is that you can improvise, and you can change and adjust things on the fly, and you always see all on a scale. When you're working in CAD, you're always going by bits, by layers, and you lose the view of what you're doing. Just like many instances which are disconnected, and you have to print, and in the print you see things, and then you correct. But when you work by hand, the process is much different. There's something I miss in pure computer work. Well, the floor plan already with the scale and the dimensions. So you can see for a library, you have the lobby, one open space, we have the periodicals and the toilets, which is very considerate. So it's almost public toilets. Here, the wardrobe and the reception, the counter, when they make the control, they go to the main reading room, right? And you have the counters for borrowing books, and then individual study rooms or the common reading space, plus the stairs going to the upper floors, and my favorite book storage, with all the administration and offices in the back just looking at the water, and children just playing around. And while drawing, checking how this ending point of this wall, ending wall could be done, right? So how would be that stair to connect the floors? So it's kind of a shaping, experimenting, and making almost the final drawing. See how you have many axonometric details, tests around. So as you draw, you keep checking how things work. The long section and the different floors of the storage. And then this is one of the theaters. Actually, I designed most of the pieces. Okay, classical theater, right? Several trials, several checks, and then final solution, still checking, and then giving proper sizes on scale. That was a bit more fixed. It was not so difficult as a library, but still having the hall and the lobby space. So trying to make something which is not too mechanical, which has some kind of attractive, some spaces which will inspire people to be there. Plans, the difficult integration always of all the common toilets for the public and all the artists' rooms in the backstage. Of course, this is a very simple theater, and this is stage. So the idea was to have this backstage to be possible to be open, like folding the whole back. So you may have the full park as a backstage, as a decoration of that theater. And this is the almost final drawings, preparation, elevations. So this was the backstage, which could be totally rotated or turned to open. See, and the facade was totally different building, but tried to have some consistency with the library. Well, this is again that set of buildings, the cultural center with the planetarium, with a small check of that wall. And actually, I checked all floor plans, if it had one to 1,000, how they could be used. So which kind of plan could be fitted there. It's tiny, but still it's room by room. Work. Everything drawings in between. So this is like a big bar cafeteria, exhibition area in the center, and several rooms and service areas which will connect to this kind of a huge service wall. And then, okay, library in process, planetarium in process, and the library in process again, things overlapping always. More, well, this was the section of the cultural center. Actually, the section is working out with the levels. So you have the coffee shop and the restaurant looking over the exhibition, which is very theatrical, a lot of top light, which is more of a landscape building than really built things. So it was part of the landscape itself. Section for the planetarium, and then some in between, almost final, more sections. And then actually we're going back to the beginning. This now we have number 2 at the beginning of the series. This was number 1, like trying to give a context. It's going to happen. So it was a aerial view of the city. So you have the original Prado Museum, that church with the cloister, the original pond, right? The astronomical observatory, botanical garden, the east gate. These were the points which I used as a support to create new lines, access, streets, channels, and a series of landmarks, buildings, pavilions, and so on. original initial sketches, right? A bit more advanced. So that planetarium had a long process for a PT critic in the end. Yeah, this is like initial sketches and some presentation drawings for the in-between presentation. And this is the result of the planetarium. So when the professor saw the section, he looked at me, okay, may go. But this presentation drawings, and this was presented at 1 to 500 because it was very big. And actually for this project, I did a full library, a full theater, and a full museum cultural center with a planetarium. So I did 4 in 1 or 3 in 1, plus the landscape. Okay. Even machine room was done in detail. But you see, at 1 to 500, you can detail very little, but you have to study the real size and proportion of the spaces so you can understand how the building works. And you see, we have toilets. You don't need to put all the detail. Everybody understands that 11 is toilets. Of course, stairs everywhere. At that time, accessibility was not a worry. The detail of the section. Again, this probably was a bit larger in scale, but see the way of the section showing just the interior space, not what happens inside the walls and the floors, because at this scale it's not relevant. And anyhow, I said it's not very accessible, but there was a central ramp to move through the building. So you show quite a lot of things, but it's not over detailed. But important things like the suspended ceiling of the coffee shop to have a bit more flow of space inside is in the drawing. Or the structure of the tower, or the end water part of that channel, telling that you can arrive to this building by ship. So this is the roof plan. All this is water. And this is the park with the result of all that was done. The full theater cultural center, opera theater, School of Performance Arts, and some other projects which were done the following year. So those City of Theater, Opera Theater, Performing Arts School, the full park, 4 projects were 1 year, right? So it's like 2 projects per semester, more or less. Okay, we didn't have the course by semesters, it was by years. This is a A2 size drawing. Well, suddenly the plans of the library, some detail. See the composition, right? So title, details, and something which didn't fit. So most of the drawing is the building, and then you don't limit. So this is the water, and the drawing doesn't fit everything. So the frame of the drawing just ends and lets the water like go into infinity. So it's a strategy to demonstrate things which get out of the drawing. Well, this is to show the level of detail. Again, this is 1 to 200 that I remember. So this gives you an idea of the proper graphic density. This is like the limit on how much you can work at that scale. It's in section. This is the presentation drawing. You can see the strategy of putting a lot of air on the top, right? To make the drawing breathe and to call the attention, not to put too many things in the plan. This was the theater. So conventional theater, experimental theater, like the black box. And then it's so mixed. Okay, I think we are going back to the beginning, right? So yes, this was the last drawing. Okay, so this is a little bit messy because they're not in order, but going back and forth, you can get an idea of the process, right? From landscape idea, strategies, how the idea changes. The most extreme case was the library. It was the first project, which comes from a very classical building to something more modern, but still a bit shy. And then the last project, which was the dramatic arts school, was a little bit more aggressive and a bit more confident in that sense and more experimental. But of course, this is a full year, 2 semesters working. I'm working like crazy. Okay. So I don't know if this is helpful, but many things I tell you, right, on how important is to know exactly what goes inside the building so you can design those spaces in the proper place, not only with their own size, but with their own mood, right? How important is to imagine or visualize how buildings are used, right? I have a few sketches. Actually, I lost money and many are submitted and never returned. Some I keep. So, but you can see that design process, you try to understand everything at the same time. Only you can produce only one thing at a time. But when you're trying to define the building, you see those sketches, you have plans, sections, elevations, images, details, because you try really to imagine the real thing in the time you have. Well, this is what I did. And it was okay. Apart from the observatory or the planetarium, which kind of a silly Ajuma design, the critic was acceptable. Was unacceptable. Let me stop sharing this. What should I do? Stop sharing. Okay. If you are bored, we can end here. If not, I can try to find some analysis drawing to show something which is not the project, but just looking into existing buildings. But I think it's a bit more messy. Let me see if I can go. Okay, probably this. Oh, yes. I was a bit confused because I will show you. This is shorter. This is just 64 pages. And this is a very short exercise, probably 3-4 weeks. And this is only analysis. Okay. So it was a library project of one of the old professors of the school, which was just finishing. So we had the opportunity to study the project drawings. And after studying them, we could go inside the building for 1 hour and take additional notes. It's what happened with our artist house, right? And then we have to give an interpretation on why that building was like that. So when you analyze a building, you understand how things are. So you understand how things are, but you have to understand also why things are like they are. Let me see if this works. I took the photos of these drawings at night. I had fluorescent light. And in reality, fluorescent light is flickering. So some of the photos, you can see the flickering with a very strange color. And I didn't repeat them. You should take photos of drawings on daytime, not with fluorescent light. Okay. So let me share again. Here we are. So this is the cover, right? A little bit done in a hurry just before submitting. This was A1 drawings, so A1 size folder that I remember. And in that course, I was number 32. This is the exercise. So it's February 5th, 1980. And we had just 4 weeks to do it, right? And this is the conditions, what we have to do, and the question. So we have to say how the building is related to the environment, how the building exists in terms of proportion, mass, image, exterior treatment and design, and then very specific elements of the design, like windows, openings, access, entrances, enclosures, details, and so on. And then we should analyze all those elements in plan, section, elevation to give an interpretation of that building. So the first thing is to draw on site. So this was done in February. February is not as cold as Korea, but it is cold. So it is very early in the morning, drawing pencil, and remember my fingers getting frozen. I was doing the drawing of the library, which is this building in the center with existing cultural center, which is neoclassical, and a very huge neoclassical building next to it. And then one park. Right. So this is just drawing number 1. And this is just what we call this was part of the exercise, like the visual representation of the existing building. This is a bit more fast drawing. So this is like the opposite side from the urban side. On the right is a hospital. So there was an obvious parking problem. And this is one corner of the library, which was the book storage, which it was kind of fortress tower. And probably I did this in 2nd year. So probably when I went to 5th year and did kind of that library, I had in my mind the book storage as a fortress in another different way. Well, this is again line drawings from like going around the building. This is like a very fast drawing to get the idea. And then this is interior sketch. This is dedicated to Uri Minje, right? This Contebar. This is imagination from the plans. We couldn't have the computer rendering, of course, so we had to reproduce the space ourselves. Sometimes just imagining the mood, or being a bit more precise on how the stairs are always interesting and tricky. Obviously, this is a drawing which is much more elaborate. See also the effort to imagine the light and how it works in the space. Because we have the direct light, but if you work a lot by hand, you can represent also the reflected light, that indirect light, which in any building is very important. On the space of the stair. The interior space, again, light, top light. This is like a main reading space. You can imagine your reception. Once you pass the control, you go upstairs You have the reading room with top lights. This axonomical view of that space. That's there. Some details. Those details are taken in the building, right? And something interesting like the handrail bending detail, which I found curiously similar to the plan of the building, which is like two wings with a bended wing linking both. And this is on-site drawings of the courtyard, of the interior, and from the roof. This is the classical, huge neoclassical. It looks like a church, but actually it's a museum. The morning drawing I showed before was around there, more or less. That's a detail. And then a lot of geometrical analysis. This is the grid of the building on the drafting board. And we knew this architect had a lot of studies of classical architecture. Also, this was a very modern building. So I was looking for different proportions, and I did explanations of what I was looking after. And to some extent, you could define most of the geometry by this kind of geometrical relations. Also, I tried to convince my professors. Also, the same game in elevation. And this is about the creation of the main shape of the building, right? Like giving the, like going backwards to get the origin of that organization. And myself quoting Vitruvius, which I thought it was fun. I don't know. After considering numbers 10 and 6 were perfect, they added them and created one even more perfect, which is the number 16. This is Vitruvius. So probably I should read, I don't remember. I was considering that the 16 was key number of here. Okay, and there is plenty of drawings. This is original drawing. This is something you always do, to collect the original drawings. And even this is in process, this is not the final result. So with that documentation, you also explain the process of how things were created. Then this is what we call the generation of shape by function. I'm reading, I don't know what is that. But it's trying to go to the beginning and understand how the mass, not just the geometry, but the mass of building was created in the existing context, right? So watching the conditions, then explaining different operations, which could explain how the building was done in many places. Not bubble diagrams, but well, a diagram of how the library works, then how this organization brings to a building shape and a three-dimensional organization with 3 vertical nodes and 3 linking elements, right? Again, this is a graphic trying to explain how I imagine this was thought about. Topography alone, which is another conditioning, and how that diagram I thought before was interacting with that topography. Then how that defined the accesses, how the circulation was organized in 3 dimensions. But you see, you start from the axis, vertical elements, and then the circulation, which in this case was very clear. And then you start overlapping things to see how they work. The parallel circulation, not the public, but the areas which are just reserved to the access of materials and the staff, and then the overlap of everything in 3 dimensions. So you have a 3-dimensional representation. This is a 1980s SketchUp. SketchUp. And then you individualize, I don't remember anymore. So it's like a different analysis on how different areas are served by different communication elements. and then always putting things together. The access to the book storage, to the research and the reading areas, they can overlapping, and then the imagination of the image, why this shape was generated. So it's like the metaphor of the ship, the metaphor of the castle, the metaphor of the railway, that's for the roofs, right? So it's kind of a modern reference to those writings of Le Corbusier. If you read Le Corbusier's Two Words, One Architecture, he was praising all those industrial buildings as an inspiration for his own design. And well, it was telling this could be. This was imagining the empty space before there was anything, the empty landscape before there was anything, and how the architect could have imagined his building when there was nothing. It's like trying to guess the initial sketches, of course, knowing the result, but designing backwards. This is not the building. This is one street of the university. This is in the university area. Actually, this is the street I walked every day to go to school. From the subway to the school, there was like a couple of kilometers. So you have to run fast to reach class on time. And then how probably this idea was a concept which appeared in the sketch. Of course, I did every day that street, but my professors did probably 30 years earlier, right? Only the trees were a bit smaller, but we all used the same building in the same city, in the same area, which was kind of interesting. Okay, those existing spaces. This is the crazy parking area. So how it was before having any building, and how important was this corner, because this was the only part of the building which could be seen from the main street, not from the park on the behind. So I was also thinking, how on earth did the architect reach that result? So I thought, famous castle. By the way, this was also, that exercise had a nice critic, because the professors thought I kind of worked more or less acceptably. But this drawing, they said, don't draw like this. This is again like such a bland and drawing. So this was a scolded drawing. So don't draw like this. This is too fluffy. Actually, it was the adjective. It was like a fluffy. It's like a jelly building, not a castle. This was supposed to be more acceptable. So this way, connecting this kind of medieval architecture from the native land of my professor, which was North Castilia, to this design. And then how the structure itself inspired the decoration of the facade. That was a comment by the architect himself. So of course we had a lecture, and he explained the building, and I don't remember anything. Well, I don't remember everything, but one thing I still remember, because it was the motivation to do this, was that in architecture, even in classical architecture, and if you quote, for example, Borromini, no borrow money, but this, so Borromini, the decoration of the building actually is always motivated by the structure and the construction. So it was an inspiration to start from the structure and try to guess why or how it became the motive of the facade design. See how I did by memory the small outline of the museum in the background, because always the context is important, right? So it's just the shade of those arcs and that tower which are part of the environment there. And then, well, those shades in the columns were actually something which matched very well some machine game they did in the facade, which is represented here, like a small protrusions next to the windows, right? So you have something which reproduced the shade of the columns. At least that's the reason I gave, because I had to say something about this. So this is why you come from the plain strip window to the also very common strip window with a structure and something more elaborate, which was this building, which you have a bit more sophisticated game of shadows, shades, and windows. Of course, this was the design of this architect, and I had to say it was nice and had a reason of being. Detail. And this is some fact I found interesting. So next to this library was this huge building. This is part of it, which looks like a church. Actually, it's a museum, but it has these huge arcs that really you can see from far away because they are so deep, so clear, so strong. Whereas this decoration is a bit complicated and nobody remembers that. But those arcs are really, really in the memory of everybody who goes there. So I thought that probably those vaults which the building used created kind of visual connection with the original arcs, which was very similar in size and scale, but were just the negative, the opposite. And it was the backwards design sketch of the massing of this building, which I have drawn a few weeks earlier on the site. And this is the main facade of that museum, which is a huge arc. By the way, this was another professor, but somebody who was teaching the 1940s, right? So it already passed, well, he already passed away when I was at school. Again, more castles. This time I was careful not to make too fluffy drawing, just to explain a little bit how this could connect with the feeling of the mass of the existing building, like a low building with some corners which are very clear and make the accents towards the landscape. And then finally details, construction details seen on site. How difficult is to mix round elements with the connection with the ground, this plinth. Even more difficult with the existing very classical supports, so you have an ugly connection. Sometimes you see your professor's works and you see, oh, they didn't solve this. And then you say, hey, they cannot criticize everything. And that's it. So that was 4 weeks trying to understand one building, to give an explanation. And you see, it's trying to see from the program, the organization, the image, the interior space, the landscape, the organization. So after you do many of those, you have a lot of practice and some eyes to see what you can look for. And then your relation with buildings change, because once you see one building, you start localizing elements and features and trying to see how things work behind that appearance, right? So that creates a habit. And this is what I understand by analyzing. Of course, this was very fast exercise, right? Because, but this was like the most important course in that year. So this was February, this exercise number 5. So probably we had like 8 or 9 of those in 1 year. So like one every 3-4 weeks. Okay. So It was about 1 hour, a bit more than I expected. 1 hour and 10 minutes. Let me stop sharing. Okay, so well, you saw the good and the bad. I didn't take any drawing out. So you see everybody has better and worse days, but in the end, it is the regular work and both when you design and when you analyze, trying to see the problem from many perspectives with many techniques and from different views gives you a much easier, or at least a much more complete way to deal with a problem in both terms of design and analysis. And of course, the key is practice, right? This analysis was second year. In first year, we have a full year or more general analysis. I don't know if you can hear, I cannot hear myself. So first year was a full year drawing from objects to smaller spaces to representing the city. Second year was more like a backwards analysis, but we had also in first year, full year of the technical drawing, which we did drafting, but we had also three-dimensional geometry. So we get 3 courses in 1 year, which is only drawing. In the second year, we had theory of architecture, which is not what they teach you. It was like aesthetics and the philosophy of those Vitruvius, Immanuel Kant, or Aldo Rossi, all those things. So you went into many thoughts. And we had also a history of art, in which it was not about getting labels on what is Romanesque or Gothic, but with so many buildings. And for the exam, without cheating sheet, they said Santiago Cathedral, you know, in Santiago, in the north of Spain, in the end of Santiago Sunlegil. And you had to draw by memory the floor plan and explain the structure and the design of the building. So I cannot find them, but studying history of art was like pages and pages memorizing the floor plans and the sections of all historical buildings. And it was crazy, but you learn so much because you have to draw everything and you compare them and you have to explain them, right? That's a good exercise. So when you start third year and you do your first studio, you have a lot of practice on many things. So you can tell things, you can draw, you can analyze. And even so, this one is difficult, of course. That never changes. But you have many tools that I wish you develop, because really, really they help. The more you know, the more you can do. But to know, you need to know what to look for and how to analyze buildings and cities. So that's what I wanted to say. Don't cry, it's you. Okay, so I hope that clarified a little bit things that I repeat over and over. And you keep thinking, what is this guy talking about? Well, it's about this. Okay, good. Any question? Any comment?
Professor,
Yes.
I wanted to ask, you
Yes.
talked about the visual connection between the arch of the museum and the window. You said
Yes.
they're similar, but totally the opposite. Negative, you said? I didn't
Yes.
understand.
So, okay. So let me simplify. So in the landscape, you have this park. We have this museum, right, with those arcs. And then the library with these volumes, that small tower, and this kind of vaults, right, which were appearing from time to time. Then next building and trees and so on. So what I was interpreting at the time is that this is very modern building, although it had medieval references, but this could be like any modern Alvar Aalto or whoever, with a very classical building next to it. So those arcs is what remains in your mind, but you have the big arc of entrance and the tower and so on. So I thought this vault was like the solid of this void, a solid version. It's like making a mold and putting the building. So it is different, but it is the same shape. It is a similar scale, and they're next to each other. So this a kind of very interesting visual connection. This is a motif which repeats. This is an accent. So the meaning is different, but there is some element which creates some connection. When you speak, for example, of having some kind of harmony. Okay, so Professor Song can speak of harmony. You have to be careful about harmony because harmony is very complex concept. It's not just having brick and using brick next to it. It's also about subtle visual connections, which allow you to still have a totally distinct building, but with some elements which connect to each other, right? So rather than harmony is like a visual connection. There is surely some reference to that modern architecture, right? Those vaults, those simple shapes, this purism of Le Corbusier, or medieval architecture in the case of the castles of North Castilia. But surely this is a small gesture to connect to an existing building of one guy who was the professor of this architect. He was the school this guy was teaching there. Does it reply your question?
Thank you.
Thank you for asking. More difficult questions? So you have to make me suffer.
So just one thing, but not difficult one.
Then don't ask. I don't like easy
okay.
questions.
Just
What is
please. Okay. So is there any practice routine of drawing you did?
it? Regarding the drawing technique.
Right.
Yeah. I took drawing lessons since or from 4 years before entering school. So I had a son there who was just starting, and at that time, architecture was famous because 100% of students failed drawing. I had to retake. So you spend one more year. The year, or just little after I entered, not just the beginning, they changed from 5 to 6 years. So first year was divided into 2, but still people would take on average 3 years to make those 2 years, right? So since I was very determined to study architecture, my dad, who is a professional warrior, I inherited that. Not warrior, warrior, the one who worries, right? He just asked friends who had students in the School of Architecture, and they said, oh, there was a guy who drew so well. His name is Leonardo. Everybody calls him Da Vinci. So he was hired to give me drawing lessons since I was, I think, 14, right? So it was all Saturday afternoon, maybe 3-4 hours. So I practiced a lot, right? And I had like the basic training of dedicated hands, mostly pencil pastel charcoal. That guy was not so good with the watercolor and the pen and the brushes. That I learned at school, practice a bit more. Well, I used to do something like that. And we did like a classical drawing, like the typical gypsum of Michelangelo, slaves or Greek sculptures, self-portraits, rooms, street drawing, abstract painting, listen to music and trying to draw it, a lot of technique of doing many things. So when I reached the school, sometimes the critic I got, especially in design courses, is that my drawings were too nice. And even a plain design looked nice. And I was very frustrated because what's the plan with it, right? But there was a lot of training. The basic is to draw a lot, of course. So you get confidence and many things, right? The first thing I draw, the first exercise, to draw my left hand with the right hand with pencil. Then my room, I did in every possible way. And then going to the street and draw with pencil, with color pencil, with a Conte bar, with people, without people. And some drawings are terrible, some days are difficult, the same with the sculptures. Fast drawings, to do full sketch in 1 minute. I don't know if you can hear. And then to finish one sculpture with care in 6 hours or 7 hours. So you have all the details, the reflections, and the feeling of the gypsum. Practicing. But in the end, this is just tools. For architecture, you don't need to go so far. Actually, with the years, they are not so demanding with drawing. When I went to school, it was difficult. But so you have to be careful with it. But you don't need to be an artist. You need just to have skill enough to have some confidence to draw anything you need and to express it. I don't know if I can, let me see. 84, 85. I know this is old drawings. 1970s, because it was from the 70s. Oh, this is too early. Let me see. Okay, I will not show in detail. Some drawings I did before going to school, because we have this folder. Let me see. What we have. Oh. First view. Two items. This is from some of my sketchbooks. I did the wrong button. Plenty of drawings. Okay, so let me share again. Oh, I cannot share. Oh, just a moment. I'm doing many things. Let me go back to Zoom. I'm lost in my own computer. Okay, so this is drawings I did when I was in high school, right? This is on the street. Actually, this is by memory. This is on a holiday in some of the towns we went, and just by memory, I just invented my own town. Let me have the main selection because I didn't want to show all. So this is my first drawing lesson. But this is my teacher's comments, his annotations, and his drawing of the hand, telling how to outline and how to use the shading. And this was my first drawing with him, right? Which there's small difference. Then this is the buildings I used to imagine, 1966, 76, 3 years before going to school, without having any idea. So when you draw like something like this, think you are doing like a high school design, not real architectural project. It's kind of cute. But let me see. So this is drawings we did at home, for example, right? Like trying to have a scene of everyday objects. The guitar geometry is very difficult. Or going to the park and drawing just the trees and the mood. Right? There's always a date and what is in the drawing. Or, well, the station, that's 1977. There's a station which is totally renewed, but this is more giving the idea of how the life is there. Let me see a bit more boring drawing of just technique. Okay, so this is myself drawing my teacher. It's like doing a session of fast drawings. This was my drafting board. And with different techniques also, right? This is imagination drawing, the subway at that time. So this is by memory. So drawing by memory is important because you test how much you have control of the technique and of the subject. This is nice. This is the East Gate we mentioned always, right? It's also fast drawing on the street. So you see, you mix techniques. This was the house of my teacher. So some afternoon I'm showing the afternoon sunlight there. I remember that his mom was from the north of Spain and she had fantastic food from the north. So I was eating and drinking while drawing. I cannot forget. So this is a real street drawing by comparison to the one we saw before, which is just by memory. And then let's see one more. There's so many. Okay, this was my professor, right? So because we took turns, so you see, he was much better, of course, much more artistic, but you learn from watching also. And that was myself at the young time. And many sculptures. This is by memory. And this is by looking. And this is all those gypsums. And this is street, sculpture, plant. My room. So you have books, the sculpture, old furniture, old lamp, my study table, and the board. Because we did A1 to A0 size drawings. And this is not my drawing. This is my professor's. Abstract, abstract, non-abstract, line, shade, whatever. Okay, so you draw a lot with different techniques and you get improving and you learn how to do streets, plants, buildings, people, cars. And then not only that, as you draw, you get an understanding of how things are, as you know already, right? So furniture, chairs, rooms, cars, children playing, animals, all that. Since you draw, you have an idea on how they are. I never showed those drawings in school anywhere. So that's my high school drawing training. Okay. So that was my routine. drawing and drawing and drawing.
Thank
With
you
many
so
different
much.
techniques. Yeah, fighting. I did not work so much on making models. Actually, I did very few models at school, so that's a weak point. But really, we didn't need them, and we were so many at school. There's no way to handle models, right? Nowadays, the students have to make models. At least they study models always. But we did a lot of drawing by hand, so we compensated. That was not easy question. There are, I think one of my friends is actually a painter, an interesting guy, and he has an online course for drawing in general with many techniques I learned. So there's many techniques I don't put here. Some like it just having the sheet of paper and doing horizontal lines, right? Just to, and then lines in between, and then in between. So you control what you're doing. So I lost a lot of control, but it's like doing straight lines, right? And then in between, and then in between, until you can get regular, and then in vertical, right? The iPad is very difficult, but still you can do it. This in A3, A2 paper with the full arm, and then circles, right? Cubes, but well, circles, so you really get some control of your hand. And I had full blocks, fulls of lines, and of course diagonals on one side, on the other. And that helps you to have some control of the hand, to make straight lines, curves, and to put a line where you want to have it, right? So that's an exercise, very, very preliminary, which almost every drawing school makes you work on it. And in my case, I told you, I have not hundreds, but dozens of just practicing to get some control of the pencil. Of course, strong, soft, we cannot replicate here, but strong, soft, right? Fast, slow. So you can have a lot of expressive variation in your lines. So it's an exercise anybody can do anytime with cheap paper. Okay, good. More questions? No questions, requests, because we have midterm closer and closer. No request. Complaints. Come on. I'm sure your chat is full of complaints. I had twice a complaint in building systems. One student telling, "Professor, please finish on time because I have class later." The class was 2 minutes late. Had to finish at 11:45. We ended at 11:47. So you can complain, even for the 2 minutes overtime. I wonder what happens in the studio when we finish 2 hours later, not 2 minutes. Okay, no comments, no complaints. Your opportunity. Oh, Spain art. Let me see the chat. Lost Amanto gets the work. What are you speaking about? We lost many people, but well, hopefully I might do something after I retire. I don't have many years left for teaching. So I hope I still have the opportunity to build. I miss doing real design work. I do some collaboration and small projects, but the real life of being in a project is something I miss a little bit. But that's flattering. Thank you so much. That will not improve your grade, but thank you so much.